Simon McKeon, thanks for joining us today and giving us your time to tell us a little bit about what's happening at CSIRO and your role. Kick off with a question just about the changes that are taking place at CSIRO. Can you tell us why they're happening?
We've been involved in a major reform program for some time. Certainly the board and the management have agreed amongst each other that there was an important need for the organisation to be simplified, to be streamlined, to be able to be in a position to come closer to those people who use the things that we create. The organisation has obviously been on a journey for quite some time. Indeed, some could say from a global perspective, the matrix that we're all very aware of was groundbreaking. I think even 10 or 15 years ago, one would have said, but it will continue to evolve. And certainly we listened very, very hard to what CSIRO employees were saying over a long period of time, that the time had come to simplify. We'd actually got to a point where the organisation was not operating as well as it could. So this is a big exercise. It's like any reorganisation. It's got its elements of pain. The board understands that, but is equally committed to be pushing this through with management at this time.
So Megan Clark's term ends at the end of this year. Only recently she was honoured as a Companion of the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday list. They're pretty big shoes to fill. How do you plan to replace her?
Look, in some respects it's just the normal selection process for a CEO, but you're absolutely right. She's a special person. CSIRO is a very special organisation. I spend a lot of time in the private sector. But whilst in the private sector we have many companies competing against one another, many of the things that CSIRO does are unique. There is only one CSIRO, and Megan was kind enough in a way to say, look, she felt that it was right to have another year added to her term to complete various things, and the board agreed with that. That actually gave us a significant amount of time also to think carefully what is the right process to select her replacement. And the good news is that we've got plenty of time to make sure that the decision is the best one for the organisation.
Are you worried that the new Chief Executive might make a whole set of new changes? It's
a good question because of the significant restructuring that's going on at the moment and has been going on for some time. You know, some might say that that's a bit unusual because typically a CEO that's had a successful 5 or 6 year term, you don't see much happen in that last year or two. Well, that sometimes happens, but it was right for CSIRO to actually embark upon this restructuring when it did. A new CEO will come in. He or she will have their own views as to what occurs at the time, but I think what I'd be saying at this point is that one thing they won't have to do is the significant restructuring that's going on at the moment. And equally, it wasn't in any way right to wait until the next CEO came in as well. But what will happen in the future, I don't know. What I do know is that we're doing our best to simply appoint the right person for CSIRO 2015 and beyond. I'm sure change will continue in one way, shape or form. I hope that it's not particularly significant because what's going on at the moment is very, very big. But time will tell.
You mentioned that CSIRO is unique. How is science important to Australia?
Science is important to the globe. It's important to every nation and particularly to Australia for a number of reasons, including some of the unique things that affect us. We can't rely always on another nation to create the things or the services or the ideas that we need. So we will always need to have some self-sufficiency in the area of science. But as someone who spends most of their time in the private sector, I guess what intrigues me is that, and I'm not ashamed about saying this, it's just a fact, that the private sector in Australia, which I think is terrific, we're globally competitive in a number of industries, but as a sector, as an entire sector, we're not world leading when it comes to innovation, to R&D. We're not. My hope is that we will one day, but for the last 9 decades we have absolutely needed a thriving CSIRO to advise government, to advise the corporate sector, to advise, if you like, consumers on all sorts of large range of things, and that isn't changing. I sometimes get into trouble, certainly inside CSIRO, because I have a vision for a better private sector as far as innovation sometime in the offing. But equally I would say the only way that private sector will get there in Australia is with a vibrant CSIRO helping it at this point in time.
You mentioned there the important role that CSIRO has advising government. How does the board interact with the government?
Look, it's a good question. The board comes from all over Australia. Most states and territories are represented, and there's a wide diversity of person that comprises the board at this point. And I've got to say, each and every one of them have the same passion and interest in making CSIRO as good as it can be, particularly at this time when we are in belt-tightening mode. It's tough. But I suspect that each of those board members take all sorts of different opportunities to connect, particularly with government. As I said, we come from all around Australia, and many of them have individual relationships with elected officials from the states that they come from. Many of them are obviously important people in the private sector, take every opportunity to remind the private sector what CSIRO can do. Look, I think we're I'm perhaps a touch biased, but I think it's a terrific board. It's a board that deep down only wants CSIRO to be the best CSIRO it can be. Some of the decisions we have made have been tough in recent months. There's no motivation to do that other than to make the strongest possible CSIRO in the future.
And what do you think are the opportunities for the organisation?
Well, look, I think the first thing is that whether it's CSIRO or any other organisation, there is no sense in having a long-term plan of uncertainty, or worse still, diminution, making it smaller. And accordingly, the resolve of this board is to do what has to be done in 2014 so that it can resume what I would argue is a normal growth path for any organisation as soon as possible. We have to be realistic. We have obviously most of our funding coming from the federal government. We have to be alert to what the political cycle is telling us at this point. But firstly, the organisation ought to be one which is a growing, healthy organisation with all sorts of opportunities in the future that it doesn't have today. I think when one thinks about what Australia is looking for in a CSIRO, the possibilities are basically just unlimited. We're still a young nation in many respects, with a relatively light population, extraordinary potential, and the fact is that not all of our innovation is provided by particularly people from outside. There are clearly three, I think, areas where Australia has a very strong future, being our resources sector, our agricultural sector, and to an extent tourism. But there are many, many other sectors that, when we think about it, actually just play to our natural strengths. Not only what we happen to have as a nation, but in truth the needs of a world that has more than 7 billion people in it, comprising increasingly a large and affluent middle class. And many of the things that we actually take for granted, such as in the wider healthcare area, CSIRO plays a very, very important role in ensuring that some of our best health technologies can actually get to market. They might be invented in the lab of a medical research institute, but often there will be collaboration with CSIRO to ensure that it actually develops into a relevant product.
You've mentioned the importance of the private sector and the roles that you have in the private sector. With so many other responsibilities and things on your plate, how do you find the time to represent CSIRO?
When I was first asked if I wanted to become a member of the CSIRO board, I can recall asking myself, why was I approached? But look, I literally jumped out of my skin. I'm the classic story of the little boy that went to school and was told all of what CSIRO did so many years ago. And whilst I never became a research scientist, I ended up in a suit and was a lawyer for a little while and then an investment banker. The extraordinary opportunities that research provides Australia has never ever been far away from me. So I was invited onto the board. Every day that's a CSIRO day for me, whether it's a board day, whether it's perhaps going to Canberra, spending time with our elected officials, simply going to a place of research, spending time with people that I admire enormously. They're special days. I don't require any reminder other than it's a CSIRO day, and I literally spring out of bed. It sounds a bit odd, I know, but perhaps to some extent I'm a frustrated scientist. We need to make these awful decisions at a very early stage in life, and perhaps not many people know that I'm a yachtsman and got involved in a syndicate that created the world's fastest sailing boat. I'm not a scientist. That syndicate totally revolved around science. But as the helmsman, for me it just wasn't another opportunity to sail a boat, but actually to mix with people that were absolutely stretching the disciplines of hydrodynamics and aerodynamics and meteorology and all sorts of things. For me, I was an observer. But that drives me. And yes, I have other responsibilities. I lead an extraordinarily privileged life. But if ever Megan Clark is on the phone about a CSIRO matter, one of my board members, whoever, I'll always take a particularly deep interest.
You've mentioned some of the kinds of areas that CSIRO could work in. Can you tell us about just some of the research that inspires you? Maybe one example of the research that you've seen when you've done one of those visits to the lab or out in the field of the work that's happening at CSIRO that really, really does inspire you.
You're only allowing me one opportunity. One of my privileges, approaching 4 years as the chair of CSIRO. I mean, we do make a real attempt to get the board into the places where the innovation is really developing. But just recently, the board visited Bribie Island, where we have a wonderful aquaculture focus. When I think about it, CSIRO's diversity of activity is so broad. And on this particular day, we went to Bribie Island. I'm someone who does know that Australia has a relatively large aquaculture industry, but when we got there, I was informed that it's actually approaching $1 billion. And that CSIRO is playing this incredibly important role, just not in a narrow area, but across a range of different things, whether it's by ensuring that the species of prawn, for example, is the very, very best that we can develop, ensuring that the particular foods that are consumed by, whether it's barramundi, whether it's Atlantic salmon, are the very best they can be. Indeed, I was told in Bribie Island of the amazing work that's going on right down south, in and around Hobart. Just one area. I'm not even sure of the percentage of CSIRO's workers who are in that particular area. But when you add all the other things that CSIRO does, yep, it's an organisation which is, let's be clear, is being placed under some pressure as a result of what's occurring now. But when I think of the extraordinary output that it has across such a broad range of activity, I'm perhaps not an expert on this, but I'm not sure that there's any other organisation in the world that can say we do so much over such a broad area. And I'm really proud to be, a small part of it.